reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Thank you, Lord.
Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. No one can take them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one can take them out of the Father's hand, for the Father and I are one." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm told often by a person who I love dearly that I am a selective listener, that whether or not I'm wearing my hearing aids, I listen only when I want to. It's pretty much true. But I prefer the title distracted listener. All right, I'll be blunt. Sometimes I'm just plain rude. If I'm reading something or writing something or watching something, I think it's fair to say that I'm not a very good listener. I hear, I might even respond, but I'm not actually listening, and it's not good. However, I don't think I'm alone in this. Many of us think that hearing and listening is the same thing, especially when it comes to the voice of God. Did you notice the line in the gospel that I just proclaimed? Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice." They hear my voice. It didn't actually say that they listen. You know, the world around us is so noisy and distracting today that it's a wonder that we can hear, let alone listen. Pope Francis remarked recently, "It's so difficult to listen to the voice of Jesus, the voice of God, when you believe that the whole world revolves around you and there's no horizon, because you become your own horizon." Voice recognition is a powerful element of our consciousness. Whether we are sheep or human beings, its capability to guide us, to warn us, cannot be denied. A familiar voice can often comfort us in our memories. Our day-to-day existence can be like walking through a busy marketplace in a foreign country where you do not speak the native tongue. You hear swirls of sound and shouting and clamor and distraction, and then suddenly your ears pick out a voice speaking your language, maybe in a song being blasted out of a loudspeaker, and you feel some sense of relief just hearing something, anything that makes sense to you. You feel drawn toward that familiar sound. And this is how life sometimes feels. Sometimes we hear a lot of noise, a lot of calls, and we're not certain which way to turn or to look. At other times we hear the voice of a parent or a friend, even the voice of a deceased loved one on a recording, and our response is instantaneous and trusting. Well, the relationship between a shepherd and his sheep is no different. In biblical times, shepherds would combine their herds at night for protection against predators and thieves. When dawn came, they would call to their own, and the flock would instantly separate by shuffling in the direction of their own shepherd. By the way, a side note, it works with fifth graders too. I remember that well. The sheep truly did know the voice of their shepherd. The shepherd knew his sheep, and they followed him. And that's what we hear in the gospel today. Jesus, the good shepherd, knows us, and we recognize his voice. But never having actually heard the voice of Jesus the way you're hearing me right now, what does it mean? Well, it's more than air being forced across your vocal cords. It touches us in a deeper way. Voice expresses a person's sense of self, his very being. So perhaps we hear it with our heart and not just our ears. In an article in USA Weekend magazine, I read that not only during Holy Week or Easter season, but any moment, any time of the year can be one where you listen to God and God listens to you. The article went on to suggest that most people don't even know the depth of their own spirituality. Contributing to this report was Father James Martin, an editor of the weekly Catholic magazine called America. He mentions that there are 6 ways for us to assess our spiritual awareness, 6 ways to recognize God's voice calling to us. And they are, number 1, you feel incomplete. Your wish for something more might be a sign of your desire for God's fulfilling presence. Number 2, you're wistful. Do you ever look at a sunrise and feel a connection with something beyond yourself? Experiences like this can reveal your natural desire for God, which is one way that God attracts us. Number 3, you feel grateful. When you feel thankful for something very simple, like a conversation with an old friend, this can point to an underlying awareness of God's goodness. Number 4, holiness. When you read about holy men and women, people like Mother Teresa or St. Francis of Assisi, and you wish that you were more like them, that's God calling to the holiness that's already inside you. Number 5, clarity. When you have even fleeting feelings that you are right where you should be, or that life suddenly all makes sense, that can be a sign of God's encouragement. And finally, vulnerable. When you're sick or struggling, you often feel a greater need for God. But God isn't any closer. You're just more open to hearing his voice in times of trouble. I believe that God communicates with us in other ways too, that he speaks to us in our dreams and coincidences and impulses. One of my favorite books was given to me by my mom. It's called When God Winks at You by Squire Rushnell. I really recommend it. In it, you find many examples of how God speaks to us or winks at us through the power of dreams and coincidences in our lives. The stories related are touching, sometimes amazing, but are a little too long for me to relate to you right here, so that's why you need to read the book. Most of us are not tuned in to the notion that many wonderful things that happen to us are, in fact, God winks. Well, here's a personal one I can tell you. When Deacon Dan and I and our wives were in a Sunday diaconate formation class many years ago, our director brought out a book by St. Augustine. It was a thick paperback, and it was called The City of God. We were told that every deacon candidate should read this book. I leafed through it and I saw that it was not going to be a walk in the woods. I recall thinking something like, yeah, I'll get right on that. Well, the very next morning, I was standing by the flagpole in front of the old school down the street there, greeting my students, when I noticed an old paperback lying on the ground on the sidewalk not 5 feet from my feet. You guessed it. Same title we'd been shown the previous day. It was pretty hard for me to ignore that one. Here's the very book right here. The book that fell from the sky. So our challenge today is to hear the voice of Jesus, to recognize and to follow it. It would be nice if we lived in a world like that of the early shepherds, one free of all the commotion and distraction that we seem to have become so used to. But are we listening? We need to take the time and effort to listen for the shepherd's voice in our lives, in our prayers, to hear his voice coming through others as a means of showing his love and concern. And would it help? Would it help for us to occasionally make an effort to remove ourselves from that noise that prevents us from hearing more clearly? There are so many voices competing for our attention in this world, but to which one shall we listen? The one whose authority shapes us and guides us, the one that leads his flock to eternal life.